On today's show, the Dow Jones fell early on Monday trading, down 100 points as global growth concerns outweigh positive Mueller outcome for the president. And in our second headline, how parents of adults can gently close the bank of mom and dad. That's coming up on today's Money in the Morning. Well, hello, welcome back to another episode of Money in the Morning. I'm Joe Saul-Sehy from Stacking Benjamins. This is the show where we go over not one, but two headlines ripped from the financial press. And not only do we read them like some podcasts do, we actually talk about what they're going to mean to your wallet. And today is a big one because there's a lot of economic data out this morning, but we won't just stop there. We'll also take the two headlines, which have nothing to do with each other on most days, and combine them into something we call the big idea that you can take home with and use throughout the day. Money in the Morning is brought to you by Tiller, the smartest way to manage your money in a spreadsheet. Tiller's the only tool that automatically updates Google Sheets and Excel with your bank, credit card, brokerage, and other financial transactions each day. Head to stackingbenjamins.com/Tiller for more. All right. First weekday podcast this week. Happy day, everyone. We got a really good show today because I love it when we get a lot of economic data out. And the reason I love it is because if you're like me, when I first started my financial journey, I had no idea what the heck any of this stuff meant. I liked hearing the people talk about this thing was up, that thing was down, economic data from these people, but I had no idea how that affected my wallet. And the good news is it does. But we're going to tell you exactly how on today's show. So why don't we kick this thing off, Laura?
Here are today's Money in the Morning headlines. Ready, set, go.
And with that little push, let's launch into our first piece, which comes to us from CNBC. Fred Imbert, Sylvia Amaro, and Ustan Swang all chipped into this piece. The piece says Dow falls 100 points as global growth concerns outweigh positive Mueller outcome for Trump. We are doing this late morning, Eastern Time, United States, on Monday. And by the time we did this, the market has started to come back. So maybe it's come back even more, hopefully so. But let's dig in. Stocks fell Monday morning as concerns over the outlook for the global economy continued to weigh on investor sentiment, even after the special counsel found no collusion with Russia on the part of President Donald Trump. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dipped 102 points as United Health Group and Apple lagged. S&P 500 declined 0.4%, led by declines in the energy and tech sectors. The Nasdaq Composite lagged, falling 0.5%. The moves came amid a global stock decline in Monday's session, both in Asian and Europe markets. Japan's Nikkei 225 index dropped 3%, while German and French equities also declined. Worries over the global economic outlook were stoked on Friday after the so-called yield curve inverted for the first time in more than a decade. The 3-month Treasury bill yield topped its 10-year counterpart on Friday, thus inverting the yield curve. Investors consider this to be a signal that a recession may be coming soon. Disappointing economic data released Friday out of Europe, coupled with a downgraded economic outlook from the Federal Reserve, added to those concerns. Quote, economies in Europe and China continue to deteriorate, causing uneasiness that the problems overseas could affect the U.S. markets. Bruce Biddles, chief investment strategist at Baird, wrote in a note, there are signs that our economy isn't as robust as last year, such as the decline in capital spending in the third and fourth quarters of last year. U.S. stock futures initially pointed to solid gains Sunday after Attorney General William Barr said special counsel Robert Mueller's long-awaited investigation did not find enough evidence that Trump's 2016 campaign colluded with Russia. The piece then goes into a letter to top lawmakers and into the political stuff happening in the United States. Let's dive into this because there's a bunch of economic stuff that we really want to dig into this morning here. And this is quite an interesting piece because let's start off with this idea of the yield curve. So the yield curve inverted. the hell does that mean? What is a yield curve? Well, the yield curve is this. The yield curve is, if we look at interest rates on different things, and in this case, we're looking at Treasury notes, United States bonds issued by the Department of Treasury. And we look at short-term bonds, and they pay out a certain yield. They give off a certain interest rate. And then longer-term bonds that the Treasury offers also give out an interest rate. Now, if you think about this, the Treasury is asking you to loan them money. That's what a bond is. You're loaning money to the United States government. When you loan money to somebody, and in this case, Treasuries get sold at auction, it's actually kind of cool to think about, and I'm not going to get too far into the nerdism of this, nerderism, nerdtasticness, nerdorama. I don't know, but I'm not going to nerd out too much. Let's just leave it at that. When we look at short-term interest rates, generally investors are willing to accept a really low rate of return to offer the U.S. government money for a short amount of time. But to give even the government money for a long period of time, imagine somebody comes to you for a loan and there is a short-term loan opportunity and there's a long-term loan opportunity. If you loan somebody money for a long period of time, you're not really sure how they're going to do financially. So because of that, you jack up the interest rate a little bit on that. So the yield curve generally will move up. It'll move up in a little curve over time, and that's called the yield curve. If you loan money to people a long time, high interest rate. Loan money to people for a short time, short interest rate. That's actually flipped now. And that means people are asking for a lower interest rate over long-term stuff than shorter term. Why is that? Well, the reason is because economic uncertainty over the short term is more than economic uncertainty over the long term, meaning investors think there might be bad news around the corner. And these aren't just little investors. Usually when we talk about something like the Fed, these are big investors. These are huge investors that buy most of these things. So if that's the case, a lot of people pointing to very smart people who think that, you know what, there's bad news coming. That might be true. The other thing, though, that sometimes is true is there's this groupthink, right? We see one person do something, and then other people immediately go, well, if they think it's a bad idea. So instead of doing research, we're kind of watching what other people are doing here. That said, whenever we've seen the yield curve invert, we have seen a recession happen. So that's what people are very worried about this morning when it comes there. When you also look at around the world, you look at the Federal Reserve with data out and guidance saying, we think stuff's slowing down. The EU saying they think stuff's slowing down. We take those things and we add it to the inverted yield curve. Lots of economic data and economic stuff happening around the world that says that maybe we're going into a slowdown. What that means for us and our wallet is this. We might over the short term pay more money on our debt. If you have an interest rate on your credit card that's variable, if you've got an interest rate on your car loan that's variable, we probably expect those to continue to go up. Your stocks might get bumpy. I think we're in the part of the ride right now where things have been going pretty well. And the pilot just put the fasten your seatbelt sign up. Everybody return to your seat. We see some choppiness coming ahead. Does that mean the choppiness is going to happen? I was on a plane last week. They had us fasten our seatbelts. Nothing happened. It ended up being an all right ride. But if all the economic data says it's going to get choppy, just go back to your seat, fasten your seatbelt. If you start with the end in mind and you work backward, you've nothing to worry about. However, if you've got money in the stock market over the short term, it's a horrible time to have money short term because we really don't know what's happening next. Of course, we usually don't know what's happening next, right? But in this case, lots of signs point to negative. And it's not just my friend Len's magic 8-ball pointing to negative. Lots of smart people there. It's funny. Heather asked a great question. She says, was this topic a few months back? I remember learning about the yield curve last year at some point, but because it was doing the same thing. Actually, Heather, we talked about that here and it flattened. It actually went completely flat. I thought at first that it was an inverted yield. I'm like, didn't the yield curve invert? Went flat. And so a flat yield curve, when you're giving somebody an interest rate that's the same to borrow it long-term versus short-term, also doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. This is getting even a little worse. So not good there. But I think that the big lesson, though, when it comes to this headline, if you just moderately follow this and you follow the fact that this report just came out, the all the stuff about collusion and politics, all that comes out, and you think, wow, the stock market, with all this stuff behind us, all this junk, the stock market should do pretty well. Stock market doesn't do what you expect it's going to do. Maybe by the end of the day, maybe by the time people hear this on Tuesday, things have rebounded a little bit. But all this economic data over the short run and over the long run is going to trump politics. And that is our first takeaway. Numbers always beat politics. If you think something is going to be great because of a headline, maybe over the short term, headlines are great. But over the long term, numbers win. Numbers and stuff, right? Let's say hi to everybody who's hanging out with us here on Facebook today. We've got a rowdy little bunch. To start off a little quiet and not anymore. Our friend Lori's here. She's ready to roll. Paul is here. Hey, Paul. Rebecca's here. Kathy just ran the LA Marathon. Congratulations, by the way, to everybody who ran the LA Marathon or any marathon. And Kathy says she's out on a walk. I'm just happy Kathy can walk after the marathon. Mike is here. Mike's going to be on our roundtable on Stacking Benjamins fairly soon. Sandy's here. Speaking of somebody we got to get back on a roundtable, that's our good friend Sandy from Yes, I Am Cheap. Heather, of course, is here. Rebecca. Victor is here. Victor, by the way, is an Airbnb host and just found 2 bottles of Dom Perignon in his Airbnb fridge after the guests left. And they weren't, well, is there such, I was going to say they weren't cheap, but is there such a thing as cheap bottles of Dom Perignon? I don't think there is. And Victor, by the way, if you need somebody to help with those, just, come by Detroit and we'll have a good time. Let's move on to our second piece, which of course is always is going to be something completely different. I feel like, who is that? Monty Python. Now for something completely different. How parents of adults can gently close the doors to the bank of mom and dad. This is from the Chicago Tribune. I have to tell you, I picked this piece for 2 reasons. A, I like this idea, and B, well, I won't spoil the surprise. But there is a you'll see why I picked this piece. It was funny. I'm sitting over my Sunday coffee and reading along, and all of a sudden I see something. But Laura Daly wrote this. Being a grown-up is hard. Being a financially independent grown-up is harder. Our children must take on a lot when they reach adulthood: rent, food, transportation, insurance, not to mention staying connected, cell phone, cable, and or Wi-Fi, and perhaps student loans. It's a challenge for most of them. In a 2014 poll conducted by the Pew Research Center, 65% of U.S. adults between the age of 18 and 29 said they'd receive financial help from a parent in the preceding 12 months. 65%. You want to help, but you also want them to stand on their own. The trick? Weaning. Instead of pivoting from paying for everything to paying for nothing, you should methodically transition your child to financial independence. Quote, when I stepped out at 18, didn't have a clue about managing money. I ended up in debt with a bad credit score and had to take out payday loans, recalls Letissa B., an IT manager in Houston. The single mom not only turned her financial life around, but she decided, I didn't want my daughter to have that same journey. She didn't. With B's advice and guidance, her daughter Jasmine, 22, not only pays her own way, but maintains a monthly budget and has 2 savings accounts, emergency and travel, and multiple income streams. Didn't happen overnight. Mother and daughter have routinely held financial conversations since Jasmine received her first paycheck as a high school senior. Quote, if you have the means, there's a lot of benefit to helping your child achieve financial independence, but you have to be strategic, says Bobby Rebell, a certified financial planner and author of How to Be a Financial Grown-Up. I'm reading this piece, and then I see Bobby halfway through this. I thought that was awesome. A University of Arizona study found that higher parental expectations and a well-grounded financial education promote a more successful shift to young adulthood. If you're ready to transition your soon-to-be adult offspring to financial autonomy, here are some tips for getting started. I want to launch into these in just a second. But I also want to say this ahead of time, is that is that this idea of transitioning from banking mom and dad and making it a more gentle process, I think is a big key to helping your kids into adulthood. It was very difficult. And I'd love to hear, if you're hanging out with us live, I would love to hear your stories. Did your parents help you transition, or did they do largely what mine did, which was full support to zero support very, very quickly? And don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming my parents. I'm not going to write a big old book about how my parents ruined everything for me. It ended up all right. But I do think that soft landing can sometimes help. So how is it with your parents as we walk through these? Number one, first tip says to start early. Children can grasp basic money skills as early as middle school. You know, it's funny. I think they can do it even earlier than that. I mean, I was working with my kids on money at 6 and 7 years old, even younger than that. 4, I think 4, we started talking about, maybe even 3, about what different coins were, you know, and how they were different. And then 5 or 6, we started playing Monopoly Junior and making change. And that was when my kids realized that those numbers that were on the bills actually meant something, that they were different. And then later on, you know, you got to go into why the ATM machine doesn't just spit out money. That was a big lesson too. Hey, we're out of money. Just go to the ATM, Dad. So start early. Leslie Tane, financial attorney concentrating consumer debt, says to tell the kiddos that they want a video game or to go to concert with friends, they got to save their money and pay for it themselves. This instills a level of independence early on. I like that. We actually did that as well with our kids. You want to do stuff? Great. Made sure that we always had a plan of ways for them to earn money, but then they had to pay for stuff, you know, but it's got to be a two-piece solution. It can't be, no, your kids can't ever earn any money and they have to pay for stuff themselves, but you don't really teach them how. So you got to teach them how to earn and then how to spend. It's both sides, not just how to spend. Number 2, seize the moments. Use any questions about money, first paycheck, first car, first chunk of cash as a gift to jumpstart a conversation. Rebel recalls using her then 17-year-old stepson's questions about the stock market as an impetus for a chat. When Jasmine received her first paycheck, B reviewed it with her line by line so the high school senior could understand withholding, taxes, and the like. I like doing this. I like reviewing purchases. What most parents do is their kid wants to buy something completely dumb. And, no, we're going to leave it at dumb. Because as a parent, you know it's not going to work out, right? Might be something that's pretty neat, but you know it's going to be a waste of money. Let them make the mistake and then circle back. I don't care if you have to put it on your calendar. Circle back maybe a week later and say, how did that work for you? How did that work out? Don't take away the purchase then and go, no, that's horrible. We're not going to buy this silly thing that's going to be wrecked in a week. Don't do that. Let them buy it. Make a $10 mistake so they don't make a $1,000 mistake when they're on their own. Like, let them fail small. And we don't want to do that. I get that. But let them fail small and they'll be much better with the big money later on. My problem, I got to college, never handled small money. Got to the big money stuff. I was making some pretty dumb big decisions. If I'd failed small first, it might have been a little bit different. Number 3, have them teach you. I love this idea. It's important kids understand how finances work, and when they hear from friends, and what they hear from friends might just be plain wrong. Ask them to explain the difference between a credit card and a debit card, or collision versus comprehensive car insurance. Oh my goodness. Hey, Jimmy, here's a question. I know you're 11. What's the difference between comprehensive and collision car insurance? Probably not going to do that one. But I do like that point. Have them teach you, and you can then weigh back in. Next, help with the right expenses. Create an exit strategy is next. So lowering the amount of their rent that you pay, showing them over time. We did that with the cell phone plan with my kids, and then give them choices. Empowerment is key to financial independence. Cede some control and say, I'll help you with this one or that one. Which one do you want me to cover? I like that. And here's a big one. I'm not going to go through all these, but I want to share this last one here. Share your mistakes. I think a lot of us don't like to parent when it comes to money because we don't feel like we're great with money. But sharing your mistakes is a fantastic way to parent. It's open and honest on your end. You also can talk about what you learned from that. And you know what? Because you've got this loving, trusting relationship with your child, they then will remember that and less likely to make that decision themselves. Let's say hi again to our friends on Facebook. Sandy says, had to handle closing the bank of mom for my mother-in-law because her grandkids kept sucking her dry. I cut all of them off when we got power of attorney and controlled her banking. We put her on an allowance and she was free to give whatever she wanted from that. It's funny, Sandy, they talk about an allowance in here and about an adult allowance. I didn't reach that point, but adult allowance. I mean, if you're helping them with everything, moving back to an allowance, I think is a good idea. So you didn't cut them off completely. You said, hey, you get X amount of money, and then that she can give away with that little bit. So instead of just going cold turkey and everybody's cut off, gradually reducing it seems like a good idea. Number 2, I think I could make a case both ways. I mean, mine wasn't a gradual reduction. Mine was bam, we're done. And then on one hand, I was financially screwed because I wasn't ready for that moment. On the other hand, I'll tell you how to swim. Throw somebody into the deep end of the pool and you're going to swim or you're not going to. Far more dangerous, but high stakes also create opportunities. I don't know that I would advocate that way of doing it, though. Paul says in his family, Paul with Cash Crunch Games says, we never spoke about money. Conversations need to happen early and continue throughout. Paul, of course, who teaches kids about money on a regular basis. That's the expert talking right there. He says everyone needs to learn the value of money. Kimberly's here with us. Kimberly says, my parents always got a say in where we spent their money, like clothes and food, and they watched where we spent our own money. If you've got money for tattoos, you better not come asking us for money. It helped push me to be financially independent because I didn't want their approval or feedback on expenses. What Kimberly's really saying is she wanted tattoos. Isn't that what she's saying? I think maybe it might be. Lori says a fair number of adults don't know those financial terms. Yeah, comprehensive versus collision on your car insurance. I'm with you, Lori. There's precious few people, I think, that understand the difference between those. Heather says her husband and she have an allowance each pay period for their own purchases, keeps the incidentals even in the budget. So it's funny, Heather, Cheryl and I do the same thing because there are things that I buy that are not things that she's in love with, aka board games. And on her end, she used to go buy board games. And even though we have a wonderful library down the street, she loves to buy books. And so we put ourselves on a budget so that we, an allowance, and we have an allowance that we spend on the stuff that we like. Now, we also use that for date nights, which ends up being fun. We take each other on dates, which is a good time. All right. I think we did a great job, team, on piece number 2. How are we going to tie together the bank of mom and dad with the Federal Reserve /EU /stock market /yield curve down? Oh, we got a way to do that. And we'll tell you about it in just a minute. But you know what? We talked about teaching your kids about money. It's easier to teach them about money if you show them the line items. Maybe set them up with an account like a Tiller account. Now, if you don't even have a Tiller account yourself, what are you waiting for? Doesn't have to be Tiller, by the way. Could be any spreadsheet program. But the reason why Bobby and I really like Tiller is because of the fact that you have the flexibility to make it as simple as you want for Junior or even for yourself. I like mine simple. Mom prefers to have every single line item. And because you start off with a template when you use Tiller, it takes that flexibility of a spreadsheet and dumbs it down or makes it so that you can, like a rocket, see everything, absolutely everything. Tiller, you'll get a couple months free if you use our link, stackingbenjamins.com/Tiller, Tiller. And I really like the fact that every day, press a button, downloads all your stuff to Tiller, reconcile it really easy. In fact, set up rules the first time, and Tiller shows you how to do all this. Set up rules All of a sudden you have all the charts, track your money, set up your budget, whatever you want. stackingbenjamins.com/Tiller. Just to circle back, the most important point we made today was Kimberly said, well, yes, the tattoos. Yes, on tattoos. That was it. We can just drop the mic right there. Show over. Let's actually put these two together, shall we? When it comes to the big idea between these two pieces, I think it's this. And I'll admit, Heather was talking about a show earlier where we talked about the yield curve. We've talked about this big idea before, but it's a big enough idea that I'll probably share it again in the future because it certainly influenced my life, and I think it can influence yours as well. And that is this. We hope that when things go well and there's some positive headlines where some of the fighting in Congress might be coming to an end, that would send the stock market up. It didn't happen. Stock market was down this morning. Might be up by the time you hear this, but as of this morning, things going down when you would expect them, at least politically and infightingly, to maybe be going up. Not the case, because data, and this was our first takeaway, data won the day. And then second is we hope and we want our kids to launch, right? We want things to go well for the people around us. And it's not always your kids. Sometimes it's mom in the case of what Sandy talked about. In fact, Mike says, big idea. You don't want your kids to be adults and terrible with money. That's like an inverted yield curve for life. That's a good takeaway. And mine isn't too far off that, Mike, because you hope that they're going to do well with money. But that's not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. A strategy is teaching your kids about how to use money. And a strategy is learning about the data that actually affects the market much more than the headline does. Data, no matter what happens, is going to win out over hopes, dreams, big splashy headlines over time. And you can see the data around your kids. You hope they're getting better with money, but you see the evidence when they come home and they're not doing the responsible things with money that you hope that they would do. When you see the economic data, even if you want things to be great politically, see the economic data not looking phenomenal. So what's the point? The point is this, and I learned this from Jack Welch at General Electric, who I quote fairly often. Focus on reality as it is, not the way you want it to be. And I get that there's a way that we all want it to be. But if we look at the actual reality of the way the things are based on the data that we have right in front of us, the data, not the hope, not the dream, but the numbers, I think then we'll make much better decisions. And that, my friends, is Joe's big takeaway, big idea for today. Thanks, everybody on Facebook, for hanging out with us today. That was fun. Thank you, everybody, for listening at home. By the way, thanks for everybody who's left us a review of this here podcast so people know what they're getting into with Money in the Morning. I'm Joe Saul-Sehy. I will see you next time back here. Go stack some Benjamins.
This show is created by Joe Saul-Sehy, hosted and produced by Bobby Rebell and Joe Saul-Sehy, is engineered by Caden Thompson, and all put together by a pack of well-trained ferrets down here in Joe's mom's basement. You'll find Bobby at the Financial Grown-Up Podcast and Joe at the Stacking Benjamin Show. Go say hi to them there, too. Online, visit us on Twitter at Average Joe Money and at Bobby Rebell, or come join a live recording at our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/iStackBenjamins. I know you already know this too, but Money in the Morning is for entertainment purposes only. You should not act on anything recommended by a bunch of entertainers in a basement or even a Manhattan kitchen without first consulting your financial advisor. And second, dude, have your head examined. Have headlines you'd like us to discuss? Send them to joe@stackingbenjamins.com or put them on our Stacking Benjamins closed Facebook group. This show is a collaboration of Stacking Benjamins LLC and BRK Media LLC. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved. I'm Joe's mom's neighbor Doug, and I reserve the right to always say, We'll see you next time back here on Money in the Morning.